People who are on lower incomes, who are struggling at the moment, are expected to subsidise a battery for people on higher incomes.
Let's move on if we can. I just want to move on if we can, because we've only got...
to subsidise nuclear reactors.
Voters are being confronted with two very different ideas about how Australia gets its energy in the future. The debate is being fuelled by the immediacy of recent price shocks and a perception that Labor broke a promise to bring down prices by $275. But the baseload question facing the country is a choice between a shift to a predominantly renewables-powered future, already underway, and a mix of coal and gas in the short term and nuclear power at some point in the future with a seemingly staggeringly high cost. Politics and the need for quick fixes has often produced less than optimal choices on energy questions.
Snowy Hydro is already developing options to build a gas generator in the Hunter Valley should the market not deliver.
Well done. It's a good call.
Remember the gas-led recovery?
This is an important announcement of the government's commitment to a 660 megawatt gas open cycle generator, which will be able to keep the lights on when it's really needed and put downward pressure on prices when it's really needed.
This gas-fired power station at Kurri Kurri in the New South Wales Hunter Valley was at the centre of the so-called gas-led recovery in pandemic times. There were sceptics even then.
The wish that gas prices would one day be as cheap as they used to be is almost certainly a doomed wish.
The Kurri Kurri plant, being built by Snowy Hydro, is due to finally start operations in coming months after lengthy delays and big cost overruns. Originally forecast to cost taxpayers about $600 million, the bill is now at least $1.3 billion. And there might just be one problem.
There isn't enough gas. It's really simple. The pipeline that runs from Sydney north is too small.
The expectation that has haunted the plant since construction commenced is that it will actually start life being powered by diesel.
This plant is going to run on diesel initially because there's no gas supply to it. Why isn't there a gas supply?
Well, there will be gas supply for the first summer that counts in 2023.
Fast forward to January 2022 and to the other side of politics. Pre-election, Labor pledged to back Kurri Kurri's construction, but only if it could run on green hydrogen, and promised to put another $700 million in to achieve this. But green hydrogen remains, for now, a pipe dream.
When will it be running on green hydrogen, as you promised before the last?
Well, what we promised is what we've been working on to ensure that it is hydrogen ready.
Snowy Hydro told 7:30 that gas will be the primary fuel, with diesel to only be used as a backup. Commissioning requires the staged testing of Kurri Kurri's turbines on both gas and diesel. As to whether there is enough gas supply, Snowy Hydro said the on-demand operation of the plant means it will only operate for less than 10% of the time. We have on-site gas storage, which equates to 10 hours of operation, and don't envisage an issue with gas supply. The history of the Kurri Kurri power plant is a metaphor for much of the debate about getting enough energy where it is needed at a reasonable price in Australia. In the 5 short years since it was originally envisaged, the purpose of Kurri Kurri has evolved. First spoken of as filling a major gap left by the closing of the Liddell coal-fired power station, the surge in renewable energy since then means it is now seen as just providing the intermittent power needed at peak periods. By the last quarter of last year, according to AEMO, coal-fired power was contributing less than 50% to the system for the first time. Renewable energy has been growing and has been contributing record levels of power to the system, 46% in the last quarter of last year and up to 75% at some points. In the political realm, the argument is whether those renewables, with gas-fired power like Kurri Kurri as a top-up, can provide enough power. Talk of green hydrogen has largely been shelved. Under the coalition model, the life of old coal-fired plants are extended, more gas plants are built, until nuclear power can be brought on stream, which could take at least 15 years. Just yesterday, the LNP government in Queensland announced it would be extending the life of its coal-fired power plants.
At a fundamental level, we are capable of replacing that lost generation with a mix of renewable energy, storage and potentially firming resources like gas.
The questions in the past which prompted projects like Kurri Kurri have been whether there would be enough power to replace the coal-fired power station closures over the next decade and what to do when the sun wasn't shining.
If we built no more solar, if we built no more wind, if we didn't continue to put rooftop solar on our homes, there would be a hole in the future. There should be no hole. It needs to be no hole because solar and wind and hydroelectricity are very, very cheap now, and Australia has plentiful resources of all of those things. So provided that we roll that out and honestly just continue on the trajectory we're on, there won't be this so-called hole.
Saul Griffiths says the argument about baseload power and what happens when the sun doesn't shine is actually a remnant of an old power system.
Baseload power is really an idea that emerged when we put coal on the grid, because you can't turn coal stations off. So overnight, they had to keep them running even though there wasn't really any demand for it, and because it was too expensive to turn them off. We don't have a baseload power problem in Australia. We have a evening peak and morning peak problem where that's where all of our demand is.
Which brings us to gas. The Coalition talks of the need for gas to fill shortfalls. Labor acknowledges the need but says it is more marginal. The energy market operator, AEMO, notes the risk of peak day shortfalls and seasonal supply gaps in the southern states is expected to arise from 2028, with annual supply gaps emerging from 2029, when production from existing, committed and anticipated projects in the southern states is forecast to fall 32%, requiring new supply investments. Part of the confusion around the outlook for gas concerns the fact that while it is not needed too much for electricity generation for households, it is still needed by some manufacturers.
We've actually seen a decline of 26% in gas, in domestic gas usage in the last 10 years.
There's two very different customers for energy in Australia. There's small businesses, households, sort of the average Australian going about their daily life. And then there's industry, and heavy industry in Australia uses a huge amount of electricity. Because industry pays the wholesale price for gas, gas is a little bit cheaper than electricity for industry. That won't be true for much longer because the price of solar and the price of wind is so low, and because the technologies to use electricity to convert that into industrial processes are all coming along. So in the next decade, we won't need gas for industry either. But there's a tiny period in the middle where the industry wants to ensure that it has a supply of gas.
The Coalition's nuclear policy proposal is controversial not just because of its price, but because its modelling was revealed to be based on a much smaller economy. And from within its own ranks was this pragmatic assessment.
We're latching onto it as a silver bullet, as a panacea, because it fixes a political issue.
When we look at the relative cost of generation, it is quite clear from the CSIRO and Australian Energy Market Operator report, the GenCost report, that solar and wind are by far cheaper than nuclear. And this is true even if you take into account the fact that solar and wind require additional storage through batteries and pumped hydro.
Saul Griffiths says the benefit of a rollout of home batteries on a scale proposed this week would not just be in easing peak loads on the electricity network, but could actually provide more access to power than the proposed nuclear power stations.
That's equivalent to 10 or 12 of our largest coal stations, and that can bridge the gap between daytime and evening. That is more than all of the nuclear power plants combined that have been proposed.
So we're looking at a considerable time before we can even start building nuclear power stations. Best case would be at least 15 years and maybe more like 20 years. The timeframes really don't match because by that stage, wind and solar will be so widespread and the price will be so cheap that it will undercut the cost of nuclear, particularly in the middle of the day.
Staying with energy, and the Coalition has released details of its gas policy announced a few weeks ago. Essentially, it would force exporters to sell more gas to the domestic market at a fixed price rather than on the international market for higher prices. When the government introduced price caps on gas in 2022, the opposition then called it bad policy. The Shadow Resources Minister is Susan McDonald, and I spoke to her in Darwin earlier. Senator McDonald, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
The opposition came out very strongly against the government setting a price cap on gas a few years ago, saying it would choke off investment. Why won't your policy have the same effect?
Well, this is a completely different policy, and the government's failed price intervention that's actually seen prices go up was the wrong policy. But what we're doing is seeking to drive down prices to increase supply and to get gas to where it needs to be.
How can you set a price for gas and assume that it won't choke off investment?
Well, because what we're doing is not seeking to set a price, but to drive more supply into the market. More supply means lower prices. We've established that it's between 50 and 100 petajoules is what needs to come into the market to do that. And at the same time, and this is the important part, because we have an abundance of gas in Australia, we want more Australian gas for Australians, and we want to encourage more supply into the market so that there is we can preserve foundation contracts for our export customers, but we can bring on more gas at affordable prices, decoupled from the export market, for Australian manufacturers, for Australian jobs, and for the sort of small businesses like I saw in Darwin this morning, where they rely on gas for their coffee shop and for other, businesses.
The gas projects that you're talking about are, in most cases, large international joint ventures with a $10 effective price cap. Why won't they take their business elsewhere?
Well, I think because Australia is a stable jurisdiction, it is close to growing markets in Asia, where there is huge demand.
There's huge demand in lots of other parts of the world. It's a highly competitive world, the gas industry. Why would a gas producer choose a country that's set a price cap where they have to sell their gas at $10 when they can take their business to another part of the world?
Well, because they can still sell their export contracts at an export price, so long as we are, and what we are ensuring as the coalition is that we leave an adequate amount in the domestic market so that Australians aren't penalised by higher export prices. We have an abundance of gas in this country. Australians should benefit from that. We have companies who are telling me that they will still continue to invest. And we will ensure that Australian gas is produced, additional supply comes online for Australians. This is the right policy. It's the right thing to do. And I think I'm pleased about it.
Do you accept that Australia is in competition for international investment in the gas industry?
Yes, of course there is competition, but it's not just about price. There is, as I've said, a number of elements. One is an experienced workforce. One is the efficiency of our approvals, how quickly we can do those. We are an environment that encourages gas. And unlike Labor, who has done everything they can to have an anti-gas policy, a future gas strategy that has no encouragement for gas, they've failed to clarify approvals. They put more staff into the offshore approval agency, but approvals have actually doubled in time. There is a whole lot of things that the Coalition is saying. We are pro-gas, we want to see more gas, we want you to export more gas, but we need you to leave a greater portion in Australia so that Australian businesses and Australian families can benefit from the abundance of the resource that we have here in this country.
You said you've been speaking to the gas industry, those big players, those very significant players who will be responsible potentially for developing new supply in Australia. What have they told you about their views on this policy?
They have relayed to me that their concerns with their future investment decisions, but I have other companies who are telling me that they are still very much on track with their desires to develop gas projects here in Australia.
Tell me what those companies said about their concerns about their future investments in Australia.
Well, mostly they said that it was so difficult to get an approval in Australia. It took so long. Just think about on the West Coast, the example of the Woodside project that had 7 years state approvals.
If I may, I'm so sorry to interrupt just for time, just to stay with this. Did they tell you, did they express their concerns about the price that you're setting?
I appreciate that they have shareholders that they are speaking to and they're reflecting on, but this will allow them to produce more gas, to export more gas at the export price, and in return we ask them to leave a small portion, a very small portion of gas that's exported here in this country so that Australians can benefit. That is not too much to ask.
Just a question on that, because clearly bringing more supply onto the market is the critical solution for Australia. Why are you introducing a policy that acts as a disincentive to companies getting involved in bringing more supply to market?
Well, I don't believe it is a disincentive. There is still the capacity to grow gas projects, to export more gas at export prices, but we seek to decouple the domestic price. We keep about 25 to 30% of gas onshore on the East Coast. We seek to encourage more projects in Victoria and New South Wales, the place where the shortage is most acute. And right now, we are seeing Australian businesses close. Australians lose their jobs. Australian competitiveness fall because of our gas prices. Other countries with big gas reserves are not allowing this to happen. Australia wants to be competitive. We want to keep our jobs onshore. We want Australians to benefit from the abundance of the resources that we have here in this country. And so we are doing what is right for Australians, but is right for Australian gas companies in the longer term as well.
Let me just ask you this, I'm out of time now, but what's the future saving on a domestic power bill if this policy goes ahead?
Well, there's only a small, it's about 17% of Australian gas goes into energy production. So it will be about 3% for the electricity price, but it will be much more for gas supply into Australian homes, into Australian businesses.
When you joined the party, did you ever expect it to be the party of price controls?
What I expected to see is a party that would support business, would support families, and would make sure that we have an abundance of resources in this country. Mining and gas pays the bills. I want to see more of that, but that also means that Australians should benefit from that.
Senator McDonald, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the day your policy came out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.